So today we're going to be going over the best cards in Mythical Island. It has now been out a decent amount of time, and to be honest, the decks have changed dramatically in the consistency of what's being used. Now, obviously, we're going to talk about the big ones, and I think the biggest two that we've seen from this deck is going to be the first one that I think actually comes in second, but genuinely has a pretty big advantage in what it can actually produce, mixed with the Pokemon that it's going to be fantastic with. Now, wait for it to load. We obviously have got Celebi. Now, this is a very good EX in general. There is 3 different forms. I am just going to show you the normal one. I know a lot of Altarts are pretty fantastic, and we'll see them all at the end just to see if there's any that are worth doing. But in terms of what we've got with a powerful Bloom, it gives you 50 damage per heads per energy that you've got. Now, this card is fantastic if you've got 25 different energies on it, then obviously you're going to have a pretty decent shout, to be honest. It will be very much a RNG base, who gets there first. If you're going against a fire deck, you can find that more than likely, if you are finding that a lot of people are just going on the hope that you've got a Celebi, they'll just put in Pokemon that can get to work early. Because realistically, only 2 energy to get potentially 100 is pretty good. But it is an RNG Pokemon. It is a flip of the coin. So you could do 0 on the first 3 attacks. You could do completely 100, 150, and 200 on the first 3 attacks. But that is just literally a base of the coin. Now, obviously with Celebi, there comes Cyperia. Now, this is the king of all kings in terms of Pokemon. This has just made so many interesting deck options because obviously you don't actually have to put any of any energy on it. You can obviously put 2 on it and it will give it the 70 Solar Beam, which is a fantastic one if you've not quite got the other kind of Pokemon to back it up at that time. Like I say, sometimes the decks just don't fall in your favor. But the Jungle Totem is a beautiful ability. It basically gives you double the energy. So for instance, if you are utilizing this with Celebi, you are going to have 4 energies rather than just 2. So every single one that you put on of Celebi in the energy with Cyperia in the back, you are going to have an extra double go. So as every turn you're going up by 2s. You'll go 4, 6, 8 all the way up. It is just a beautiful one, and if you can get it on the go, it's very hard to take out. It's almost like the Mewtwo guard sort of deck, because obviously you are adding the energies up, so basically it makes it very difficult not to get the hit. If you've got 8 different coin tosses, it's going to be very, very difficult for you to not hit at least 100. Now, it has happened. I think I've had 6 tails in a row, but it makes it very, very difficult. Now, obviously, you've got to have the Snivy and the Servine as well, but they're kind of just a pawn in this sort of move. We have obviously got ourselves a lovely Executor as well. To be honest, not a terrible one. I do like the EX from the previous set, which is always nice, but the mix of the two is pretty good. You've obviously got Psychic. This attack does 20 more damage for each energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. So if you are going against a potential Celebi, I mean, it's not a bad one to throw in. It does require 4 to get going. But again, like we said with Cyperia, if you manage to get that on, all you need is 2. It will double it up. If then the active Pokemon comes in, for instance, if you've got a Celebi that's just rocking loads, then you could come in off a defeat to one Pokemon and just wipe it out in one move, which will be absolutely brilliant. The only thing I don't know, with the 20 more damage, is that also, I don't think it is. I don't think it counts the ability. So say we've got 3 on there. I don't think it counts 6. I think it just counts the 3. But even so, that would be 100, what I mean, so you're doing 20 damage after the 80. So even if they just have the 3 on there, you would be doing 140 damage, which would take a Celebi out in one go, which is always nice. We then also have got this card. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. Some names I just can't pronounce, and you don't want to hear me butcher it. This one I've been seeing a fair bit. I've kind of tried it out a little bit, but I must admit, I'm a big more fan of Celebi and also Cyperia, just having them on their own. It's just easier to get the deck going with just them two, in my opinion. But I've definitely seen this quite a lot. If this Pokemon has at least 3 extra energy attached, this attack does 70 more damage. With just 1 bonus energy to put on it, that's going to be a great one if you obviously have it in the back. Because obviously, like we said with Cyperia, if you've got 2 on it, that's going to be the free extra energy. So it is very, very interesting what Cyperia can do for all of these Gratz types. It kind of just makes it that little bit better. We do then have the quick attacks, obviously, from the Rapidash. Flip a coin of the head, it does an extra 60 damages. This is going to be what you're kind of coming up against when it comes to going in against the Celebi. Potentially we find somebody that's just trying to find the Celebis, because there is a lot of them. I'm predominantly seeing a little bit of Pikachu now. I'm seeing Mewtwo still, Mewtwo and Mew, and then Celebi. They're kind of the free decks. And then occasionally you'll find a Gyarados that we'll get to. You have got Salandit, and also the evolved. If your Pokemon is active, is poisoned, this attack does 40 more damage. A little bit harder to get going because obviously it will require a Weezid or a Grimer in first. So it could be a combination deck. And I think that's the kind of interesting part we're getting to, is we're starting now to get more expansions. I believe once we get the next expansion, we're no longer going to see completely single decks. There could be potentials of multiple Pokemon, because realistically, it needs colorless. So it makes no difference what energies you're using. You could throw it in, and as long as it's got an energy on it, it doesn't really matter. Now, obviously, when you do go to Salazzle, your opponent's active Pokemon is now poisoned with this attack. It does require fire, so you could kind of just go with Salandit, to be honest, and it technically does more damage. It will poison with Salazzle, but realistically, if you're looking for that extra poison damage, again, alongside a Celebi, that's 10 on the poison. It's then going to be, what, 50 on the actual attack, plus an extra 20 for weakness. That's going to do some pretty heavy damage very early on if you can get it poisoned straight away. I think the Magmar's okay, but it's not necessarily a big one in my opinion, and kind of same for Larvesta and Volcarona, not really too crazy. We've got Gyarados EX, again another big one, coming in with a Blastoise, obviously Gyarados up next, mixed with a bit of Vaporeon that we'll get to. It's a big damage. Discard a random energy from among the energy attached to all Pokemon, both yours and your opponent's. It's kind of just is what it is, but realistically, you're looking for that big hit. 140 is enough to pretty much KO most. You've obviously got a few, I don't actually know what Charizard actually has fully. I think it has more HP. I want to say Venusaur, Charizard, and Blastoise have more than the 140. I know Mewtwo definitely does, and Gyarados itself does, but there is quite a lot. I know Celebi doesn't have that, so it's a pretty much 1 KO if you can get there. You've got the Misty Flips, you've obviously then got the Vaporeon that will obviously do some pretty decent kind of move to it. Because with the Vaporeon, you have got the ability of Washout. As often as you'd like during your turn, you may move a water energy from one of your bench Pokemon to your active. So for instance, I heard this kind of going in as the water type deck. Starmie EX was a great one. For 2 energies, you can start whacking 90s straight away. What this enables you to do, if you have a Vaporeon set up, if you're starting to build a Gyarados up, you're starting to do the damage with Starmie so you don't get backed into a corner, you could then bring the Starmie back with, I think, just a 1 energy. You could then use your ability from Washout to put everything into the Gyarados, so you could potentially just save up the 2 energies, then obviously get Starmie out, add the 2 energies back onto Gyarados, and there you go. You're smashing out the 140 straight off the bat. So with a good deck setup, that could be an incredible one. And obviously free for itself. Still gives you a good wave splash at 60. Not going to be terrible in itself. We have got, I kind of call it almost a debuffed Pikachu. Instead of the EX, you've got this damage does 10 for each of the bench. So obviously you can get a 30 in there if you really want. But just for 1 energy, can bring it out straight away. If you start the deck pretty well, you start second. If you've managed to get your 2 Pokeballs, you've managed to be lucky to get 2 bench Pokemon straight away. You can literally on the first turn start doing 30s instantly, and that can rack up a decent amount, especially if you are building the Pikachu EX deck on the back. You can obviously kind of keep going until this one's gone. You could then throw it into Raichu if you really want for Giga Shock. It also does 20 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon, very much like the Blizzard with the 10. It's again a nice Raichu. It's not necessarily meta, but it's definitely throwing itself in there. We also then have got Mew. This is always an interesting one, and I was interested to see what sort of damage it does to Mewtwo's reputation. Now, don't get me wrong, Mewtwo is still the king of the psychic at this point. We've got Psyshot that starts doing 20 straight away, always nice. Getting damage in early is going to be a big contender. Then you've obviously got the hacking. Basically, you take the attack of the active Pokemon on your opponent's side. Now, this will always warrant dependent on what your Pokemon is. A lot of the time, if you're running the Mew and Mewtwo deck and you're going against a Celebi, if you're going against a Pikachu, it's a potential to do pretty well. The Pikachu, not as much because of the electric bench, but in terms of kind of like the Celebi, you've already got the free energy on it. You could then potentially get Guard on as well. That's going to give you almost the same deal as what Celebi is every single time. So that is going to be a great combat if you manage to get him in, and he's just a straight in there like Celebi. He is a basic Pokemon, which is always fantastic. We then throw in not really any more of the Psychic, to be honest. We've pretty much got the same Mankey Primeape. I prefer the previous Primeape anyway. One that I did see that does some decent damage on this is Golem. I think just the lead up to Golem is better than the previous. During your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 30 less damage if you've obviously done the guard press. So you do need to get him up there. It's 4 energies, 3 of the fighting, and then obviously you need a colorless, but it does do 120. It's got a great HP for just a 1 point Pokemon as such, not an EX. So that is a pretty decent one to get up there if you can. Obviously you've got all the flares as well. It'd be interesting to see when we get to actually wanting to put all the flares on, but it's a solid one. If you can rock that kind of deck with the fighting, it works pretty well. Another anticipated one would be Aerodactyl. Now obviously you've got to put the old Amber in first and then kind of spawn the Aerodactyl after. But you also have got the ability, your opponent can't play any Pokemon from their hand to evolve their active Pokemon. Now obviously you can move to the bench, but that does become a little bit tedious and sometimes just a little bit annoying if you're trying to get that in straight away. It's a decent one, I must admit. You kind of then hold in their kind of hand and they have to bring them back, meaning you've probably got a free shot at something. Now, yes, they can evolve it as soon as it gets onto the bench, but potentially holding them that 1 or 2 attacks more could be enough, especially to get the 80 on, to really do some damage really early on in the fight. We then throw into Marshadow, another one that I think was quite anticipated. I've seen a few different ways that you can use it, and if you've got 2 of them, it does make it quite interesting to see how well you can physically use him, because obviously the main thing that you're trying to get is the next attack after your opponent, after your active Pokemon's been killed, fainted, destroyed. Then you obviously will do the 100 straight off the bat. Now that is going to be a fantastic hit with just 2 energies. It's great to hold them in the back. The reason why I say it's good to have 2 is because sometimes you'll find that they will go out their way to Sabrina it, to bring it into play if it's your only other benched Pokemon. You've got to make sure you've got to have another one spare, because then it makes it a little bit harder to kind of get this in, to attack it without then getting the damage back out. And obviously straight away, once you've done the hit, you've got the 100, likely chances you're more than likely going to KO it, potentially even just knock it down massively that he might have to retreat or potentially take the KO. So it's interesting how you set that one up, but it's got some great possibilities in certain scenarios. We then also have the Weezing. I think personally for me the EX, or is it the EX? No, I think it's just the normal, is pretty good from the last one with the ability as well. We then have Druddigon, another great one. I think this is an interesting one as almost like a placeholder. He's not necessarily one that is going to be set up massively. I think you definitely could, but I do find that he's going to be used to almost keep your space. He's a basic Pokemon. He does need fire, water, and colorless, so doesn't matter if it's fire or water for that third one, and he can get Dragon Claw off. But the rough skin is the interesting part. If this Pokemon is in the active spot and is damaged by an attack from your opponent, they take 20 damage as well. So it almost frees up your damage until they know they can kill it. For instance, if they are running Celebi, if they do try and take that 2 energy for the 100 potential for 2 heads, then they potentially don't get it. They get, say, a 50, they get a 0, they're getting 20 damage again, and then you're keeping this one in the spot. So it is always a very interesting one to kind of have as a placeholder, but not necessarily one I would personally rock as a main deck cover. Doesn't mean that he can't in the future. Which then takes us pretty much to the end of everything. We have got obviously the Pidgeot EX, another fantastic one if you can build him out. Sometimes can be a little bit harder, especially with the free tier evolutions, to kind of get going, because you do need the deck to just be in your favor. Sometimes the Pidgeot just never comes. Sometimes the Pidgeotto will never come. And it just is what it is. You kind of have to take your wins and your losses at the same time. But this attack does 20 more damage for each of your opponent's bench Pokemon as well. So if they have got a full lineup, they've got 3 in there, potentially you're doing some heavy damage just for free energy as well. It's not that hard to get going if you've got Pidgey and Pidgeotto already rocking and you're just waiting for the EX to come, and you could possibly just savor some of them energies. That could come in quite literally with a whirlwind. Tauros, one that I thought to start with could have done quite well, but he's just not been really seen. I think the colourless deck at this point, I think Wigglytuff really holds the kind of crown for that one at the moment. But you've obviously got Fighting Tackle. If your opponent's active Pokemon is Pokemon EX, this attack does 80 more damage. The only problem is with this one, I think, is the ability of that attack is fantastic for the EXs, and it definitely will do some solid damage on it. But you do need the free energy. The problem I'm finding at the moment is there's very few battles that I'm finding that are going on that long. Predominantly, you're waiting for the guard for the Mewtwo. You're waiting for the Cyperior for the Celebi. Even then, you might even be done by like the 10th turn. I don't think you will kind of risk having a Tauros set up as well as then potentially setting something else up to attack, because realistically, if you're waiting 3 turns and they don't put an EX in, you're kind of just asking to be knocked out, and you've got potentially 2 attacks and it's pretty much done. So it's a very interesting one to see how that one would work, but it maybe gets another upgrade in the future. We obviously have got the old Amber, that's pretty standard. The Mythical Slab is going to be a fantastic one for the Mewtwo deck, because basically for this one, look at the top card of your deck. If that card is a Psychic Pokemon, put it in your hand. If it's not a Psychic Pokemon, put it on the bottom of your deck. That's going to be great if you are searching for the Curlier, for the guard on the Rolts, because obviously if it is the Psychic Pokemon, fantastic, you obviously put that up. If it's not, it goes to the bottom of the deck anyway, shuffling that next card forward. So it is going to be a very decent one to have if you are looking at that Psychic deck, especially if you are rocking the guard and Mewtwo, the guard, Mewtwo and Mew. It will work in your favor really well. We then obviously have got the Buddying Expeditioner. Put your Mew EX in the active spot into your hands. Again, it has some use. If obviously you're finding that Mew is pretty much done, you've got Mewtwo pretty much set up, you can obviously swap it out straight away with this supporter. It's not necessarily used massively because I find Mew is almost the sacrificial for the Mewtwo, but it still does some massive damage. But it's an interesting card if you was trying to kind of hold on to the Mew as well. We have obviously got Blue. Also, it's kind of been used slightly. I think we've kind of got our supporters and items at the moment, but he's still got some decent kind of ability. During your opponent's next turn, all of your Pokemon take minus 10 damage from attacks from your opponent's Pokemon. That one is good in them the scenarios where you just think, I could do with 10 less damage. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think that one is going to be an interesting one in them really close battles. We also then have one of the fan favorites in Leaf. During this turn, the retreat cost of your active Pokemon puts it to 2 less rather than the item one for X speed that is 1 less. So if you're finding that you've got a retreat value of 3, this will basically make it down to 1. You just need 1 energy to take it off. You could buddy it with the X speed for that and then take it down to 0, because obviously items and support cards can be used together, but it's a very, very good card to have in your deck, especially for them double to keep the energy on the card as well. I don't think we've got anything majorly different with the alt arts. You've obviously got the Vaporeon that's the same. Dedenne is not a terrible one as well. Flip a coin if your opponent active Pokemon is now paralyzed. Decent to kind of stall the opponent, but it's going to be really heavily reliant on RNG. I try not to go with that, and I think that's kind of the things where you add so much to your deck that everything's just got to go right for the win. It's why I like the Celebi and Cyperior, because realistically, the main thing I'm looking for is either an early win with Celebi being lucky, or I'm looking for the Celebi to be lucky, or Cyperior to be in. And then it is lucky still, but when you've got 10, 12, 14 heads to get out of, you've got to get 14, you've got 14 flips, and you just need 3 heads, 4 heads at an absolute maximum. it becomes very easy to be guaranteed that almost. And then pretty much everything else is going to be the same. They're going to be the more favoured cards in the deck. They will be mixed and matched with other stuff as well, especially as new sets come out, and also as people do get a big bulk of these cards, the doubles and triples of them in there. And then obviously when we get trading, that's going to be interesting to see what people need to finish off their collection and just everything like that. So we will obviously cover the previous deck as well. We'll go over some more meta decks in the near future, but let me know, what are you using? What's your deck that you're currently going in to get them 45 wins in Mythical Island?